Marta is the second VP for the Ukrainian American Society of Texas. Marta was born and brought up in Ukraine at a time when the country was hidden behind the Iron Curtain and controlled by the Russian Soviet regime. Her parents, Ukrainian intelligentsia representatives, instilled in her with a strong sense of national identity and appreciation of Ukrainian culture, literary heritage, and people's unwavering desire for self-determination. From her school years, she was noted for having a gift for acting, and during Gorbachev's perestroika, took an active part in Ukraine's struggle for independence. She performed at high-profile political and cultural events, reciting Ukrainian patriotic poetry to convey aspirations and visions for a free, democratic Ukraine. She traveled throughout Ukraine and to Canada as a member of the Ukrainian Peace Committee delegation. Marta moved to the United States in 1991 after Ukraine gained its independence. As a member of the American Translator Association, she participated in international conferences and U.S. government projects aimed to aid Ukraine. As a foreign liaison officer and bilingual geoscience interpreter translator, she worked for Mobil Oil's new exploration ventures and Duke Engineering and Systems to help Ukraine and other former USSR countries develop the oil and gas sector. She served as a senior managing editor of Albion Woods Publisher and has co-authored 5 bilingual reference books for the petroleum industry. As a parishioner of St. Sophia Ukrainian Church and a member of the North Texas Holodomor Committee, Marta also serves the local community by giving multimedia presentations on Ukraine's history, cultural heritage, and political challenges. She holds master's degrees in both biology and English from Lviv University, Ukraine, and undergraduate studies in geology. She attended University of North Texas at Denton and earned a Master's of Education and Counseling, magna cum laude. In recent years, she worked as a science instructor and counselor for Dallas ISD, and currently is a co-founder and CDO of Dnipro Valley Transport, LLC. Please welcome Marta Petrash.
Thank you so much. It is an honor for me to make this presentation for this wonderful group, and thank you for standing for Ukraine, with Ukraine, and your interest in Ukraine.
Can you adjust the height of that?
Through centuries of bloodshed and tears, Ukrainians fought to achieve the supreme ideal of every freedom-loving nation, their sovereignty and their independence. With Russia over 300 years, Ukraine have had a history of violence, brutality, and genocide. Ukrainians have courageously resisted Russian despotic attempts to dominate over Ukraine. Millions of lives were lost in the struggle of Ukrainians to exercise their right to live in liberty and choose their own destiny. Freedom, democracy, the rule of law, and dignity. That is a historic choice that Ukraine have made repeatedly over the 30 years of its independence after the fall of the Soviet Union. And even before, it's the choice that will not be denied. As Russia invaded, brave men and women of Ukraine do what they consider their duty: fight to uphold the Ukraine's sovereignty. Just a brief history of Ukraine. In 1991, after the fall of the Soviet Union, on the world modern map, Ukraine appeared as a country with an area slightly larger than France's, or just under the size of Texas, and with a recent population of 43 million. But the age of Ukrainian statehood is measured by the millennium. And in 1991, Ukraine appeared on the world map, not for the first time. After the World War I, on January 22nd, 1918, the Ukrainian National Republic emerged as an independent, free, and sovereign state. This declaration of modern Ukrainian statehood over 100 years ago was a continuation of a 1,000-year history of Ukrainian state building, from the ancient state of Kiev Rus to the Cossack military state in the 16th, 17th centuries, and to the modern days. That is very important to emphasize because our existential enemy, Russia, often maintains that Ukraine is a very young state, only 30 years old, and therefore it is an artificial state. This blatant propaganda cannot be further from the historical truth. Ukrainians are descendants of Kiev Rus, the first Slavic state which during the 10th and 11th centuries was the largest and most powerful state in Europe. Our ancient capital, Kyiv, was founded in the 5th century, and therefore Kyiv is 1,500 years old.
Marta, go back.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's moving forward.
Sorry.
Yeah, no. Here you go. One more forward. There you go.
I don't know how it happened.
I know, it was going on its own.
So for comparison, Moscow was founded in the 1147, so 12th century. And St. Petersburg was founded some 300 years ago. The cultural and religious legacy of Kiev Rus laid the foundation for Ukrainian patriotism throughout subsequent centuries of devastating foreign invasions and helped Ukrainians preserve their national identity. In the 17th century, in central Ukraine, the new military Ukrainian state, the Cossack Hetmanate, led by Bogdan Khmelnytsky, was established after an uprising against Poland. It had lived for over 130 years. Then the Russian Empire absorbed Ukraine, but never succeeded to assimilate. Following the collapse of the Tsarist Russia in 1917, Ukraine declared its independence in 1918. Sadly, it was short-lived from 1918 to 1922. The nation was reconquered by Russia and was forced to endure the brutal Soviet rule, including the Holodomor. And we will talk, this is Ukrainian genocide imposed by the Russian regime through hunger, through starvation. So Ukraine and Russia have never been brotherly nations. The idea of brotherly nations has always been a part of Russian propaganda. And for centuries, Russians have tried to destroy the Ukrainian nation. Mass propaganda of the idea of brotherly nations began after the capture of Ukraine by the Soviet Union. Everyone who refers to brotherly nations supports Russian propaganda. Now, I would like to tell a few words about the Holodomor. It's a Ukrainian term which literally means famine, murder, or murder by famine, for the artificial famine genocide of 1932-1933, in which millions of people, Ukrainians, were starved to death by the order of Stalin, leader of the Russian Soviet regime. And I would advise you to go to our Ukrainian American Society of Texas website, www.uast.org, to learn more about this unspeakable crime against humanity that has kept secret for decades. And Russian regime used all its influence in the world to keep it secret, and I'm pretty sure that there are some people in this room that do not even know about this genocide, in which over 10 million people died with this painful, humiliating, horrible death by starvation. And also for your information, the Dallas Holocaust Museum holds a very impressive educational exhibit on the Holodomor. So please find time to visit. And there are new books recently released on Holodomor, and a movie I would also advise you to watch. It's very highly praised by the critics. It's called Mr. Jones. It's available on Amazon Prime. It is based on the true story about an unknown Welsh hero journalist, Gareth Jones, who risked his life to expose the Holodomor Ukrainian genocide to the world. And it is especially interesting in our era of fake news to watch this movie, because this journalist's intelligence, integrity, and courage can be a model for many contemporary journalists.
Great movie.
Oh, you watch it, yeah. Yeah, this is very...
Hard to watch.
Yes, and it actually has shown that Stalin's gold was Ukraine's grain. And this is why he decided just to starve people, because they were on his way to get money to sell his grain to the West and get money for his industrialization ambitions. Another genocide of the Ukrainian people is happening right now. It's unfolding right in front of our eyes. As Ukraine continues to liberate its cities from Russia, people globally are being shocked by photo and video evidence of crimes against humanity. Weeks spent under Russian occupation have transformed those cities in a vast killing field. These are not random acts of savagery. On the contrary, they reveal the genocide. Dead bodies lie throughout the streets, many with their hands bound. Victims are buried in mass graves. Accounts of sexual violence. Victims are women and children, both girls and boys, and even newborn baby, and torture. These atrocities often offer a grim hint of what may be taking place in other cities and towns captured by the Russians, especially Mariupol. Other towns, we already know that Putin's army has targeted the civilian population by artillery and aerial bombardment. Entire cities are reduced to rubble and left thousands dead. How to explain all this? And how to explain that majority of Russian people actually support this war in Ukraine. And so I will offer you some explanation based on history. For the past 8 years, the Putin regime has been indoctrinating the Russian people with a propaganda designed to demonize and dehumanize Ukrainians. And I sometimes watched before in the past, there is a channel, government supported in Russia, that 24/7, it means all the time, talks about Ukraine. From 2014, since they annexed Crimea and took occupied eastern portions of Ukraine, they launched this channel and always talking about Ukraine's hatred towards Ukrainians, how Ukrainians are Nazis, how Ukrainians are torturing other Ukrainians, complete like lies and fabrications, and again, for the only reason to dehumanize Ukrainians. Now it became, I was wondering why? So now it became for me very clear. So when the Russians invade Ukraine, so they don't see people as people, as humans. These are like animals. You can do whatever, they are Nazis. They are bad creatures. So it's easy to kill them, maybe violate them and torture them and whatever they are doing right now with Ukrainians. That's the consequences of this brainwash and lies imposed on the Russian people. So Putin himself has repeatedly questioned Ukraine's right to exist, asserting that Ukrainian sovereignty could only be possible within the Russian Federation. So that's the only way Ukraine can legitimately exist, in Putin's opinion. So what is the root of Russian rulers' personal obsession with Ukraine? Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, Ukraine as an independent sovereign country has chosen a path of democracy and closer ties with the European Union. And in our constitution, it's stated that we pursue the path towards NATO, away from autocratic Russia. Moscow, on the other hand, has been trying to take Ukraine back in its orbit of influence. Putin's ultimate objective in Ukraine is Ukraine's capitulation and country's absorption into the Russian world. Putin regards the breakup of the Soviet Union as the demise of historic Russia. He regretted it bitterly and views the spread of democracy as a Western plot against Russia. One major reason of Putin's preoccupation with Ukraine is that prosperous democratic Ukraine is a threat for Putin's dictatorship. It is an example for the Russian people of what they can have. Putin views Ukraine's democratic protest movements as dress rehearsals for a similar uprising inside Russia itself. So our Orange Revolution, our revolution of dignity, he viewed as a threat for his dictatorship. The second major reason why Putin is so obsessed with Ukraine is concerned with Russia's theft of Ukraine's historic name and Ukraine's identity. Ukraine has an ancient history, as I pointed out earlier. Ukrainians are especially proud of their cultural and religious legacy of Kievan Rus. Until the 18th century, Russia was called Moscovia. It was never called Rus or Russia. In the 18th century, at the beginning of the 18th century, Peter the First, after Russia absorbed Ukraine, took it under its domination, he started reforms of his backward, uncivilized Moscovia, and to boost the image of his ill-reputed country, he stole the name Rus from Ukraine. Rus is Ukraine's historic name, and Peter the First named Moscovia Russia. And from that time on, all historic misleadings and lies started. The fame and great achievements of Kievan Rus were claimed to be Russia's. Catherine II went so far as to order to write a fake Russian history and burn many authentic historical documents that contradicted a made-up new history of Russia. So while independent Ukraine has been restoring its true history, Russia's stolen identity crumbled. And I remember there was a period when Russians were kind of searching, who are we actually? One after the fall of the Soviet Union, because they understood that their ancient history, like medieval Russia and Ukraine, they were completely different countries, different territories, with very different cultures. And so they were searching for their true roots. But Putin is clinging towards this Rus as the ancient history of Russia. Putin branded Ukraine as anti-Russia and called to denazify the country. Given that Ukraine is a democracy with an elected Jewish president, these Nazi claims are ludicrous. And nevertheless, Putin's baseless assertions are readily accepted by millions of Russians living within the Kremlin propaganda bubble. So this fabricated Nazi Ukraine narrative drives popular support for the war in Russia. Russia's most credible independent pollster, the Levada Center, found that Putin's approval rating had actually increased by 12%. 83% Russians support the war in Ukraine. Russian soldiers encouraged to regard all Ukrainians as Nazis were engaging in war crimes that many interpret as genocide. The twisted definition of a Nazi has come to include any Ukrainian who does not agree with Russians, that want to be independent of Russia. And basically 40 million Ukrainians, by Putin's definitions, are Nazis. So Russia's recent war crimes have provoked widespread international outrage. In an April 3rd statement, British Foreign Secretary Liz Truss stated, "We will not rest until those responsible for atrocities, including military commanders and individuals in the Putin regime, have faced justice." President Biden recently stated that Russia committed genocide in Ukraine. Moreover, on April 3rd, 2022, Russia issued a genocide handbook for its war in Ukraine. According to Timothy Snyder, professor of history at Yale University and also expert on genocide, world genocide, the Russian official press agency RIA Novosti published an explicit program for the complete elimination of the Ukrainian nation as such. And we, on our website, uast.org, we have the information on this work by Timothy Snyder, and also there is reference to the English translation of this handbook on genocide in Ukraine by Russia. So the current priority of the free world must be to protect Ukrainian population from further crimes against humanity. So this can only be achieved by urgently and dramatically expanding arms shipments to Ukraine, especially to allow Ukrainians to protect their sky, because these constant bombardments of the cities, leveling the cities, killing, shelling hospitals, kindergartens, schools, turning them to rebel. Many consider it an act of genocide, and Ukrainians need to protect their sky somehow to stop these atrocities. For decades, Ukraine has acted as an effective buffer zone between NATO and Russia. But if the Kremlin forces seize all of Ukraine, there is little to separate NATO troops and Russian soldiers. So next will be Poland and Baltic states and Romania and other Eastern European countries. Western military aid has already had a major impact on the conflict, but most the weapons delivered to Ukraine so far have been suited to an insurgency, while Kyiv now needs to win this war. This will require more tanks, heavy artillery, fighter jets, helicopters, missile systems, air defense systems, and ammunition, as well as the anti-tank and anti-aircraft weapons that have already proven to be so effective against Putin's invading army. Ukraine doesn't call for any troops on Ukraine's, like NATO troops or US troops on Ukraine's ground. But Ukrainian soldiers are ready to finish the job alone, but they need help because they are standing up not only for Ukraine, they are standing up for the entire free democratic world. Ukrainian troops have already demonstrated their ability to beat Russia on the battlefield and are highly motivated to defend their homes. They recognize that the country's very existence depends on their ability to defeat Putin. Western leaders must now give them the tools to finish the job. The Statue of Liberty of US is a symbol of freedom and democracy. It was a gift from the French people. The French had come to the young country that was fighting a superpower to establish itself as an independent democracy, winning against all odds. Today, Americans stand with Ukraine, helping Ukraine to fight its own tyrannical superpower for survival of its own democracy and for the democracies of the entire free world. Make no mistake, Ukrainians will fight as fiercely as Americans did in the War of Independence, and they will prevail against all odds. If the world democracies do everything that they can, United States of America, UK, France, Germany, and other democracies, and give Ukraine what it needs to fight Putin's aggression, Ukraine will ultimately win. Ukraine has to expel the enemy from the country, and it needs heavy weapons. God bless the United States. God bless Ukraine. Abraham Lincoln stated, "Those who denies freedom of others deserve it not for themselves." The world should start dealing with Russia now and immediately until it is too late. Give Ukraine those MiGs and anti-defense weapons. If not, more Ukrainians that are shielding entire Europe will be killed. But this sacrifice will not spare NATO countries from the Russian attacks and direct clash with the crazy dictator. Today also I would like to ask you so this is looting that took place in many cities of Ukraine. This is like a picture of these disgusting deeds by an artist. And these Ukraine needs to win. So these are weapons that Ukraine asks for. So these are Ukrainian soldiers. Ukraine fights for all of us. And in addition to the Ukrainian army, we have so-called territorial defense. Territorial defense consists of people aged from 17 up to 70. So all actually men of that age go and fight, join the forces to defend their cities and fight the Russian aggressors. All those men and women also, they need uniforms, they need protective armors, and they need a weapon. So this is what Ukraine is lacking, because I have a relationship with some volunteers in Europe that move that supply Ukrainians by these military items from European countries, but their resources are already exhausted. It's very difficult to find these items in Europe. So I would ask maybe your group to spread the information, how we can get, because we know there are some police officers, maybe retired, that have some, let's say, armor carriers or tactical weights, or all these ammunition and protective gears for soldiers, because we need to help all these people. Some of them just lack protective gears and can be easily killed by the enemy. And also, I would like to show you. I would like to make a very short presentation, because some people asked me if the Ukrainian language and Russian language the same languages. They are actually very different languages, and Krisha, for example, she grew up in the United States and she learned the Ukrainian language, but she doesn't know the Russian language, and she doesn't understand when somebody speaks Russian. Maybe on the basic level, like table, chair, you can figure out, because there are some similar words on a basic level. But if you want to carry on a more abstract level, any discussion or conversation, these are very different languages, and you cannot do it if you know only the Ukrainian language. You cannot do it in Russian. And I would like to give you a presentation. Like I will read a poetry in Ukrainian, in Russian, and in Polish, and you will hear how different these languages even sound. And the first one is Ukrainian. Ніч, яка місячна, зоряна, ясна. This is about a young man is confiding in his feelings towards a young lady, and the description of a beautiful night and their beautiful relationship. So that's basically the poetry is about love between two young people. Ніч, яка місячна, зоряна, ясная, видно, хоч голки збирай, вийди, коханая, працею зморена, хоч на хвилиночку в гай. Сядемо купочці, тут під калиною, і над панами я пан, глянь, моя рибонько, срібною хвилею стелиться в полі туман. This is Ukrainian. This is Russian. Белеет парус одинокий в тумане моря голубом. Что ищет он в стране далекой, что кинул он в краю родном? Под ним струя светлей лазури, над ним луч солнца золотой, а он мятежный просит бури, как будто в бурях есть покой. Is it different? And this is it's a harsher language a little bit, and I know that some people that have good maybe musical hearing, they can recognize Ukrainian accent from the Russian accent. Russian accent always, whoever speaks English with a Russian accent, it's a little bit harsher accent than Ukrainians that speak English. And then Polish. Dlaczego ta noc taka cicha? Dlaczego tych gwiazd taki rój? Dlaczego jedna zda się zdycha, a druga leci gdzieś z daleka, a czwarta krwawa jak pieszczeka i na wymki tak mi ujada. This is Polish. Just a demonstration of different languages. This is so actually it's the largest country situated in Europe. Ukraine is known as a breadbasket of Europe. Has world's largest reserves of manganese ore. Has a population actually right now 43 million people and 20 million live abroad. After communist crimes, Holodomor, and the Second War, the total number of Ukrainians reduced. Modern name Ukraine is derived from the ancient Slavic word inland. During the 10th and 11th centuries, Ukraine was the largest and most powerful state in Europe, Kievan Rus. The ancestors of all Slavic people before 5th century lived in Ukraine. Ukraine was never Russia. Ukrainians were the first who began to spread Christianity throughout Eastern Europe. Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, was one of the major Christian centers in the medieval Europe. Today, most believers in Ukraine are Orthodox and Greek Catholics. The quality contest language in parish, Ukraine had the third place actually, despite the occupation. Okay, the first constitution was written by the Ukrainian scholar Philip Orlik. Ukrainian Cossacks were important European military force in Europe. Tripolline culture from Ukraine is a late Neolithic archaeological culture. In Ukrainian culture is famous for its churches, monasteries, and cathedrals. God forbid Russia will bomb these cathedrals. Nikolai Gogol and Fyodor Dostoevsky, famous world authors, whose works were based on Ukrainian culture, some of their works. Tchaikovsky, Stravinsky, and Malevich were of Ukrainian roots. There is a famous Ukrainian painter, Katerina Belokur, who was highly praised by Pablo Picasso. Tradition of decorating Easter eggs in Ukraine is older than 1,000 years. Magical Ukraine has a centuries-long tradition of creating the most beautiful fairy tales. Actually, Ukrainians created 40,000 folk songs, and Bandura is Ukrainian national musical instrument. And Igor Sikorsky from Ukraine was the designer of the first practical helicopter in US. European continent was assembled in Ukraine by Sergei Lebedev, the computer. And Ukrainians invented a plane with the largest carrying capacity, Maria, and actually Russians bombed it and destroyed it. It was a revenge.
That just happened.
Ukraine is among leading countries in exploration of space, and Ukraine gave up nuclear weapons. The largest solar power system, Peru, was completed in December 2011. Okay, Ukraine produces best vodka called Horilka. And the most famous Ukrainian national dishes are borscht and vareniki. Borscht made of beets. And just a few words about our website, Ukrainian American Society of Texas, again, www.uast.org. And you can see we have Russia invades Ukraine, take actions. We have a page about the culture, history, and more about Ukraine. We have how to help Ukraine if anybody wants to donate to Ukraine. We chose well-vetted organization and charitable foundations. So they are listed here, and there are links to their donation pages. This is about Ukraine again.
Good.
And history of Ukraine, some videos, Ukrainian genocide. This is about Holodomor. And there are some pictures made at the Dallas Holocaust Museum. So about the Holodomor. And Russia's imposed genocide on Ukraine in 2022, and there is a link to this to the I would say article written by Timothy Snyder, the well-known expert on genocide, and so who believes that Russia commits genocide in Ukraine. And this is, okay, so this is about Holodomor. And the page about Ukraine,
A homepage.
it's a
The homepage.
Okay. There is a link to the Ukrainian news.
You just passed it.
Oh,
Right
here?
there, official.
Okay, yes. Official website of Ukraine, War Ukraine UA, and every day they upgrade the information, what happens, and so you can see some atrocities committed by the Russian soldiers.
So that's today.
Okay. And situation in Ukraine, right? So all events And okay, and that's probably it. Thank you so much for your attention. And